Hello there. Today we're going to talk about some decks that you can make on a budget from set two. These decks won't take any legendaries, though I think they can be pretty strong on their own, and they can potentially get even better with legendaries. And we're going to start with the Cad Bane deck. This deck is a lot of fun. I just played it earlier against a Boba yellow deck that had plenty of legendaries, and it won. It was super fun. So here we're looking at the whole deck. And the basic concept of the deck is that we're taking advantage of Cad Bane's ability, playing a bunch of underworld cards to get some indirect damage and to control the board that way. You'll notice there's barely any green cards in here. This could easily be built as a pure yellow deck, but then we'd probably have to pull some legendaries in, right, with cunning and stuff like that. So really the only green cards are Relentless for the end game and Overwhelming Barrage, because most of the time your damage pings combined with a decent number of ambush units here are going to be enough to control the board. But if they're not, Overwhelming Barrage kind of solves the issue if your opponent is, spreading damage around. So that's why we're playing green here. I guess we have Salacious Crumb as well, um, but not quite as important as Overwhelming Barrage. With this deck, on your initial turn, one play, you're trying to get Greedo and then a Bounty Hunter Initiate out, right? That will deal 3 direct damage to something. If you play Greedo first, trigger Cad Bane's ability, and then play the Bounty Hunter Initiate or the Bounty Guild Initiate, then you can deal 3 damage to something on the ground, and you've got 2 units out. That is pretty sweet. We have a decent number of other turn 1 plays like the Crafty Smuggler or Bazine or even a Cloud Rider in here. So let's take a look at some of the reasons why this deck works. One of the first reasons is the ambush package. We don't have ambush on 3 here, but the whole rest of the way from 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7, we're playing units that probably have ambush. And I've got Zuckuss here, but you can see that we have Bosk in the deck as well, right? So if Forlorn gets killed and Zuckuss doesn't have ambush, we still have Bosk in the deck. And all of these units are Underworld. And because of the timing of how things work, you can play your ambush unit and either trigger Cad Bane first or trigger Cad Bane, his ability, after you resolve the ambush. So, someone like a Forlorn, if your opponent only has 1 unit on the field, can kill something with 5 health, even though he's only hitting for 4. And this has been super, super strong. Your Cloud Rider, even at 2 cost, can basically take out something with 4 health, right? Because you ambush it in and you trigger Cad Bane's ability, and that's pretty phenomenal. And so even on 3, Cloud Rider is a great option to have. Maybe you can play a Cloud Rider and a Greedo or something like that. So you can really keep control of the board with all this ambush on the ground. We also have a pretty strong Toro Calican package. Toro is great. He's a 3/5 that when you play another Bounty Hunter, you can deal a damage to it. If you do, you can ready Toro. Because of the fact that we have all these Bounty Hunters, we can get a lot of extra damage out of Toro, which can really keep the pressure on. Right, so not only are we keeping our opponent's field clear, but we're racking up quite a bit of base damage as well. We also have Bazine in here, and I wouldn't underestimate Bazine. She seems maybe on the surface a little underpowered, But if you have initiative and you can play Bazine as your first action of the turn, you can really shut down an opponent's turn. And even if you don't have initiative, and maybe let's say they played their unit that was on curve for the round, you might be able to bring her out and shut down their next turn, right? You're on 4 resources, you smuggle her out, and you take their 5 cost unit out of their hand. And that can be game-changing. She's great on turn 1 to potentially shut down a turn 1 or a turn 2. She's great on 4, but she's great in the late game too, right? So imagine, you haven't finished your strategy, you haven't won the game early, but you're getting up into those 8 and 9 resource turns. Well, if you can play Bazine, then you might be able to rip your opponent's Avenger or Krike Dragon out of their hand. So she's awesome the whole way through the game. And things like McClunky, Pirated Starfighter, and Xanadu Blood help us get Bazine back to play her again. And it's great because when Bazine is played, she disrupts your opponent's hand. Then, Cad Bane can trigger and deal a damage or 2 damage if he's flipped. Then we get the benefit of, returning her with McClunky or the Pirated Starfighter to do some direct damage or to bring in a pretty sweet unit. We can trigger Xanadu Blood's ability to exhaust an enemy unit or resource. And we can play her again. And what's even better than playing her again is smuggling her or resourcing her and then playing with her with smuggle. And so you're getting card advantage, you're disrupting your opponent's turn, and you're getting extra value from, Pirated Starfighter and McClunky. So it's really quite phenomenal. It's great early and it's great late. So that's most of what I wanted to talk about for the deck. In the sideboard, I have some of the legendaries and Maul who go great in this deck. So if you have those, feel free to pop those in. I think it's actually quite strong on its own. And right now, only 8 rares, and Relentless I think is fairly optional. You could swap that out for something else if you wanted. Okay, let's switch to a Ray Yellow budget deck. This one is kind of similar in that we're trying to take over the board pretty early. You can see that we have a lot of little units that cost 1 or 2, maybe 3. Then it kind of skips in our curve all the way up to 8. That is partially because of the fact that we're going to establish control really, really early. And then we're just going to use Takedown, Fell the Dragon, and Rival's Fall to basically destroy everything that our opponent plays. And if that backfires and we need to close out the game, we'll use Chewie and Redemption to do that. So here's the goal to get set up. Really, we want to play R2-D2 or Grogu on turn 1. If we're playing R2-D2, we can go ahead and put an experience on him right away, right? So either way, we've got a unit with 5 health that our opponent is probably not going to be able to get rid of. So then on turn 2, we put a lightsaber on either R2-D2 or Grogu. And now we've got either a 5-9 or a 3-8 that when Grogu swings, he's, even though he's only a 3 on paper, he's basically a 5-8, right? And he might kill things and not take any damage back. So both of these are going to be absolute nightmares to deal with. And once we have them set up and controlling the board, then we start dropping our Sentinels that are incredibly annoying to eat through. And Ray can keep beefing up these Sentinels, right? So Village Protectors as a 2/2 shielded Sentinel is not all that scary. But put an experience on them. Now they're a 3/3 Sentinel, and with a shield, that's harder to get through. Nema Outpost Constables, same story. A 3/7 Sentinel on ground is pretty nuts. So, you're protecting your base, you're protecting your big Grogu, and hopefully you will establish such an early board presence that basically you can coast to victory. Tech is in here kind of for the late game, right? So he can hold a lightsaber just fine too, whether it's Luke's or the Jedi lightsaber. Again, with 5 health, he can get an experience, so he can go up to a 3/6, pick up a lightsaber, and then be a 6/9. Moisture Fimer can hold it just as well, which is kind of cool. It is worth noting that I've cut all the legendaries out of this deck as well. You can see that they're in the sideboard. But having the Mandalorian does take this up a notch, right? Because it's likely that your R2 or your Grogu or your Moisture Farmer is going to take some damage, right? Hopefully our Sentinels can protect him. But the Mandalorian kind of makes everything better, right? Because he comes in, he heals all that damage off, and provides a couple shields. So he does strengthen this quite a bit. Obviously, this deck is going to be weak to decks that have a lot of bounce, like Waylay, because you play your upgrade and you get nothing out of it. But if you're playing more of a fair deck that's throwing units at you, with Ray to come out and restore and all that Sentinel, it's going to be pretty hard to burst you down. So I think that will be a really, really fun deck. Okay, I'm going to go through these two a little quicker because I haven't played them quite as much. But Gar Saxon Yellow is a ton of fun. Gar Saxon works really, really well with shielded units, right? So Crafty Smuggler normally is great as a turn 1 play, 2/2 shielded. But in Gar Saxon, he becomes a 3/2 shielded as long as he has the shield, right? It's kind of like Krennic, except Krennic is a little bit more conditional and comes out earlier, right? Gar Saxon, if you build a deck with mostly shielded units, you're always getting the pump. And he's a bigger body that's a little bit scarier. So early on, we're mostly trying to drop those shielded units like the Crafty Smuggler and the 7th Fleet Defender to apply a ton of early pressure. We've got Power of the Dark Side in here in case we can't make favorable trades. Let's say your opponent plays their own shielded unit. Well, we'd rather keep our shielded unit and just get rid of their shielded unit with Power of the Dark Side. But after those early turn 1 plays, you can see that most of the deck is blue. So Lieutenant Childson's in here, and he'll be pretty easy to play as a pretty big unit because there's so many blue cards in here. And it's better than playing Childson as a 5/5 or a 6/6. Playing Childson and getting an extra attack out of him, right? So instead of a 5/5, you might play him as a 6/5 because those experience tokens count as upgrades, which is great. Long Pike is awesome. I think you could include more of him, but again, I'm just trying to make it a little cheaper. And then Fenrau is also super fun. You can see that I included a couple of the Mandalorian upgrades. Those go phenomenally on Gar as well as on Fenrau. And so those are really, really fun. The Clan Saxon Gauntlet is also great in this deck, right? It basically protects those 7th Fleet Defenders and Lurking TIE Phantoms. And even though it looks like a 4/5 on paper, if you attack into it, and it is Sentinel, so you have to attack into it, it gets upgraded before or it can choose to give itself an experience before the combat damage is dealt. And thanks to Gar, that basically turns it into a 6/6. Uh, so it's really pretty fun. All right, last one is a Boba Blue deck, and kind of like Gar, Boba's ability, it's leaning you into a deck that's got a lot of units in it, right? Because when you play a unit with a keyword, you can give something +1. And the two types of units that I think benefit from that the most are units with ambush and sentinel. The units with ambush are great because you can play the unit, trigger Boba's ability to give it +1 attack, and then trigger the ambush. So something like a mercenary company, which normally is not played a whole lot, uh, can come in and attack as a 6/5 with overwhelm. Uh, that's phenomenal. So a ton of the units in this deck have ambush. A bunch of the rest have sentinel, because even though sentinel units, might not take something off the board right away, you can still give them the bump, which will slow your opponent down right away. So something like a Bright Hope or the Nema Outpost Constables, right? Both of them can come in, and for the turn that they come in, they are a 3/6, which is great. So it's another pretty fun deck that I think that you'll greatly enjoy. So I hope that these have been helpful. I think they're all really pretty good decks. Obviously, the legendaries help, but when I'm publishing decks that are really meant to be kind of top tier tournament decks, I like to do a whole lot of testing before I put those out. These I've run through a few games, and I think they might surprise you as to how good they are, even though they don't have any legendaries. So enjoy.